10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 150. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you had a great week and are ready to get some new material to work on. So this week we're going to be taking a look at an awesome blues lick from the great master saxophonist Johnny Griffin. But before we get into today's episode, a couple of housekeeping items. Just a reminder that you can get the PDFs to this episode and all other episodes that we've ever done over at our Patreon page, and you can find that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and heading over and showing your support for the show. Only $3 a month gets you all kinds of awesome benefits, and again, gets you all the PDFs to all of this stuff. And that keeps the show running, it covers our costs, and it keeps things coming at you from week to week, and keeping your jazz education journey on point. So I got to thank all the people that have signed up this week. Thank you to Seth, thank you to Vinz, and thank you to Martin. You guys are the best, and again, you keep this show coming at you every single week, and keep the material rolling in. New stuff to practice. That's what we love around here, and we love seeing so many of our listeners taking their jazz education very seriously, trying to get as much as they can out of this podcast. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So today we're going to be looking at one of my favorite saxophone players of all time, Johnny Griffin. We're going to be taking a look at a short phrase that he plays over the blues that is just amazing. There's so many facets to this short lick. He condenses so much information and so many different ways of playing into such a short space that it's just wonderful. So if you haven't checked out Johnny Griffin, make sure you go and do that. And this is off of a great album from 1958 with him and the Thelonious Monk Quartet, and they are playing live at the 5 spot, and the record is called Thelonious in Action, and it's off of Monk's tune Blue Monk, the great blues that we all know and love, the great B-flat blues. So what we're going to be looking at is this phrase that he plays starting in measure 7 of the blues. So it's over the 1 chord, and then we move into the 6 chord, which leads us to the 2-5-1 in the blues. And I wanted to extend the phrase beyond the 2-5 so that you would see how he's really handling the larger picture here. And the reason why I think this lick is great is that he displays both his prowess with bebop, and he also displays his mastery of just playing the blues and playing in a quote-unquote bluesy fashion. And this is a great lesson for all of us to not get too one-dimensional in our playing. Like on this podcast, we talk about a lot of concepts here, right? But at the end of the day, it's all about being able to fully express yourself in whatever comes over you at the moment when you're playing. And the reason why we go over so many concepts on this show is that you have to have a true mastery of a lot of different ways of playing so that your expression of your musical thoughts is not hindered by not being able to actually pull it off. And Johnny Griffin is an absolute master of this. I mean, he could play any style that you could ever think of, and he could do it in fantastic fashion. Really, really impressive musical chops and just a wonderful imagination, not to mention the mastery of his instrument. So those 3 things really go into being a great jazz player, and you have to have all those facets kind of rolled into one to be the musician that you ultimately want to be. So let me start by actually playing the lick, and then we'll talk about it. We'll dive in and we'll kind of tear this apart a little bit. So here it is, starting in measure 7 of the blues and going right through until the second to last measure. So what a great lick. So first of all, before we even get into any of the harmonic stuff, just look at the rhythmic mastery that Johnny Griffin puts on display in this lick. I mean, his use of triplets alone is like a masterclass on how to make things swing. He's got 16th note triplets and 8th note triplets, and they're intermingled with all of these great swinging 8th notes and 16th notes. It's just amazing. If you were to approach this from a rhythmic point of view, you could get a ton out of it just on that point alone without even looking at any of the harmonic material, which is obviously also very exciting in this particular lick. So he starts this in bar 7, and I think that this is a very crucial point in the blues where we're getting ready for the real harmonic motion of the blues. So, you got the 1 chord, and then that goes into the 6 chord, which kicks off this series of events that is like the ultimate cadence in the blues. So this is a really, really important part of the blues, one that I study a lot to see what other musicians are doing and try to gain some insight through that knowledge. So that's the reason why I chose to start it there. So let's look at the first measure. Now, this is all pretty much diatonic in the key of C major. Again, I'm going to be explaining this in the key that Johnny actually played it in. So even though it's concert B-flat blues, we're going to talk about it in terms of a C blues because that's what he was thinking about as he was playing the tenor saxophone. So in that first measure, he just does a very simple diatonic line, starts on the root, and plays some great notes in the key of C major. He has an 8th note line that leads to the 3rd, and then he encloses the root of C major. Now, it's also interesting to note what he's doing. He's not playing the 6th chord until the very, very end of measure 8. So he's staying in the key of C major, really, for the first half of the 8th bar, and then he's outlining A7 in the second half. And he does that really beautifully, playing the 5th up to the flat 9 over A7, and then using one of those awesome triplets. Then he gets into the measure with the 2 chord. And again, we see that awesome use of triplets, and he displays some double time playing, although for a very, very short time. He plays some 16th notes on the end of 2, leading into beat 3. And it's a pretty simple measure. That's another thing to really understand about this lick, is that there's nothing exceedingly complicated about it. But if you look at those first 3 measures, he's really playing some bebop. There's lots of enclosures. There's some chromaticism. He's really outlining the changes as much as you could possibly imagine a bebop player would do. But then when he gets to the 5 chord, this is what I really think is interesting. He shows off his pure blues playing, meaning that he's actually using some portions of the blues scale, including the flat 3rd over a C chord, which is E flat. That's that blue note we always talk about, especially when we're playing over the blues. And he kind of disregards the 5 chord, and instead of playing something super bebop-ish that leads to like a half-step resolution or something that we talk about all the time on this podcast and when we're learning jazz, he instead just chooses to play this overarching blues lick that goes over the 5 chord and then the 1 chord, right? So check out the second half of this. Let me play the 5 chord to the 1 chord for you one time so that you can actually hear what I'm talking about. So you can hear that's not very bebop oriented at all. So he played 3 measures of very, very bebop oriented stuff. And then he reminds us that playing over the blues is not all about bebop, right? It's about sometimes reminding people, hey, this is the blues, and playing some quote unquote bluesy material over the tune. So I just think that that's masterful. You set it up with all this really intricate melodic and harmonic stuff, and then he just hits you in the face with a blues lick over where you think he would play the most bebop-oriented material. I love this. And it just goes to show the genius of Johnny Griffin and what a complete player he was. So now that we've talked about it, check out the entire lick again and listen to the difference between the first 3 measures and the 5 chord to the 1 chord. No, I don't know about you, but that just makes me want to go practice. It really does. Just, the way that the masters handled the music and the confidence and fun that they played the music with and their breadth of knowledge of the tradition. You got to think about in 1958, who was Johnny Griffin listening to that inspired him? So he had to reach way further back. He was one of the architects of this music. So think about who he was listening to. And then you should think about possibly reaching back even further than you have and checking out some of those people that might have been Johnny's early influences. And what a wonderful tradition of music this is. It's just great that the music from more than 60 years ago is still relevant today. Just amazing and very, very inspiring. So I hope you got something out of this episode. I know that I'm going to study the rest of that solo and really get some things happening. Take some things from Johnny Griffin and kind of work on them in an effort to sound half as good as he does. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you got something out of this episode, and we'll be coming at you next week with some brand new stuff. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will talk to you soon. Bye.